Hello and welcome to the top 10 most likely unseen issues for the August 2017 Strategic Case Study exam on automobile electronics manufacturer AutoAuto. So before we start, I'm just going to go through a bit of an introduction to this particular video and where I've got the information on and what you need to do with said information. So how have I come up with these top 10? Well, first of all, you look at the focus in the pre-scene. If there's a lot of material in the pre-scene on a certain topic, then it's likely that there is some kind of importance of that topic. It's likely to be brought up in the exam, so there's more to talk about. And that feeds into the second point here, the degree of importance attached to it by the examiner. But that particular section extends beyond purely what's in the pre-scene, but also what CIMA like to examine. For example, ethics. It may be that there's no real mention of ethics in the case study, but ethics is considered very important by CIMA, and therefore they are likely to examine it. Next is the strategic importance. How important is it to the organization? If a certain topic is very important to the company, for example, say their suppliers. If they rely very heavily on a certain supplier, then it's likely that there might be an issue on the supplier. If something were to happen to that supplier, what impact could that have on the business? And also, just a more general experience in doing these videos in creating mock exams and reviewing exams in the past, the typical kind of issues that come up, and what kind of things have the examiner brought up in the past. And my final point here is about how easy it is to write issues on that subject. The people who write the exams are obviously people too, and they will go for ones that they know, that they can write good questions on. So what do you need to do for these issues? Well, first of all, it's important to prepare key models. So this will be things like your SWOT exam, like SWOT analysis, like your PESTLE analysis. Because building up this information now will help you to adapt the new information given you in the unseen, or help you to have that context to apply the unseen material. Next thing you need to do is practice exam questions on these issues. This will help you to understand the kind of questions that will be asked around these topics and how to answer them. And also, this next section here, it will help you to plan these answers in your mind so that when you go into the exam and you start writing, you'll already have a background in which to apply this new information. You'll already have certain points to bring up in your head as you're writing for them. And I've also put some more generic things here, such as the advantages and disadvantages of these certain topics, where they would be used and how models can be used to support them. So let's move on to the top 10 issues now. So we'll start with the first issue, issue number 10, which is risk management. Now, risk management is an incredibly important P3 topic. It's the main P3 thing. If you're going to use anything from P3 in the strategic case study, it's likely to be risk. Now, the kinds of things that are contained in P3 are risk identification, risk management, risk mapping, and controls. Now, these are all kinds of things that you may be asked to do in the exam. Now, we saw in the pre-scene that there was a section as part of the company's annual report covering the risks in the pre-scene. And those of you who watched the pre-scene analysis video series will have seen that specific risk video. But of course, there were plenty of other risks within the case that weren't properly explained. Risks such as the lack of diversification, risks such as the growth of competitors. And whilst competitors were mentioned in that risk, it didn't go into the details about the specific nature of the competition. It didn't go into depth about the fact that with driverless cars, which is one of the big issues of the case, that there is a risk that once a competitor has got their foot in the door first, it could be very, very problematic, because it's not just a case of maintaining market share. It could be a case that the first through the door is the only one through the door, because it could have a knock-on effect with infrastructure, and governments will get involved because it's a complete revolution of vehicular travel. And as a result, it could be that everything that comes after is just not taken on board at all, because of the fact that the first through the door is becoming the industry standard. A bit like computers, for example. You have Macs and you have PCs. There isn't a huge range of different types of computers. You have two specific ones that do two specific things, and another operating system is not simply going to muscle in on that business because they've become industry standards. There also wasn't a lot of talk about how to deal with these risks. They identified the risks in the pre-scenes, but didn't really go into any detail about how they were going to overcome it, whether they were going to put more investment in it, whether they were going to do more outsourcing to transfer risks away. There was a lot of talk about legal liability, particularly in instances where a car has been involved in an accident, and whether it's the driver's fault, whether it's the software manufacturer's fault, whether it's AutoAuto's fault, whether it's the car manufacturer's fault. So more needs to be done to perhaps write those sort of factors into the contract, work maybe with lawmakers, with governments, to try and come up with an appropriate way to legislate over driving cars that have systems in place that do either some of the driving for you, or that take care of things like parking, things like cruise control, distance measurement between other vehicles. It's also in my top 10 because it is a recently and regularly examined topic. Most strategic case sittings, one variant at least, will have some sort of question regarding risk. And even if it doesn't appear as a specific topic, the importance of risk is so great that it will generally always feature in some way, shape or form. It may feature as an add-on issue, as you're summarizing or you're writing an answer about something else, but you also have to consider the risk factors. And you should always be thinking about risk anyway. That's part of your role, the role that CIMA gave you as the character that you play in the strategic case study exam, is to consider the risks for the company. And so possible issues could include the key risks on a specific project. Perhaps there's a new project that you're being asked to oversee. That's quite likely. We were told in the pre-scene that part of our job description was to work with specific projects. It could be that there are funding risks. It could be that there are failure risks involved, and legal risks, for example. Or it could be to do with managing that risk or controlling that risk. This again could be on a specific project following on from the first step, or it could be for the organization as a whole. What parts of the company are not as well vetted against risks as they could be? What other specific risks have we identified within the organization, ones that we've discussed in the pre-scene and in this video? And also, how should we be managing them? What kinds of methods should we be using to manage them? Is there a cultural issue? We know we have a lot of design engineers who are very skilled at what they do, and there is a risk that those people may leave. So what culture is there in the design engineering industry? Is there any loyalty in that industry? Is the culture that we are putting with them under forcing them to leave? Are we not perhaps enticing our employees, making our employees want to stay? What kinds of roles will the audit committee play? Now, in the pre-scene, there wasn't any mention of an audit committee. That's not to say there isn't one, but there was just one. There was no specific mentioned one. And that, of course, could be a big failure in risk management if they do not have an audit committee populated by independent non-executive directors overseeing the activities of the board. That can lead to possible risk, people cutting corners because the executive directors want to save costs to boost their own salaries and bonuses. So, key points about risk if you are asked them. Specific ones in the pre-scene: competition, obviously the size of competitors like Primnav, the amount of money they are investing, the amount of profit they are making, the lack of development. Whilst it showed, or the pre-scene spoke at length about this driverless car technology, at the moment it's still very much in the testing stages. There's no indication that it's commercially viable yet. And of course the products that they do have been out for a while, and there was no real information about the success of those. So it could be that they need to look at doing something else to fill in the time between now and when the driverless cars are commercially viable. Strategies as well. Not too much mention of strategy other than their whole philosophy, the idea, the mission statement of providing this driverless car, the mission statement of making vehicles drive themselves. But of course, now that this strategy has almost become reality, this mission statement, this grand, broad mission statement has almost become a reality, do they need to now reassess where they are going? Are they not fulfilling this strategy and the needs of the stakeholders effectively? Once this driverless car has been made, will they need to make a new mission statement? Perhaps their strategy as well, being too focused on this one thing, is detrimental to the company as a whole. There's plenty of other ways in which other companies in this industry have made money by selling things like business-to-consumer products like mobile sat-navs. And that's something that the company is flat out refusing to do because it doesn't meet its original strategy. So one could argue that it is perhaps being too focused, too blinkered in its strategy and meeting its own strategies rather than giving the customers, giving the consumer what they want. Falling profits as well. Big dip from the previous year, whereas the other competitors, or Primnav at least, had a big increase. And what was worrying about this is whilst the revenue had fallen dramatically, a lot of the costs had remained fairly similar, which could suggest they're perhaps not in control of their costs, their variable costs, as effectively as they could be. Changes to consumer trends as well. Obviously, the car manufacturers have to make cars based on what the consumer wants, and companies like AutoAuto have to produce technology for cars in line with what the car manufacturer wants. So one has a knock-on effect on the other. Legal issues as well, as already mentioned. There is still a big question mark over legal responsibility and legal liability over the use of technology within cars that does some of the driving themselves. Once a driverless car is fully commercially viable, will it be a case of it's the car manufacturer that's fault, or the person who provides the technology for it? If it is a semi-drivable car, as a semi-auto drivable car, insofar as it can be manually controlled by the driver if necessary, then does that muddy the waters when it comes to who's at fault? Because will you have to answer these sort of questions in the same way as when police or insurance companies ask you who was driving the car? They may have to figure out, was the car in driverless mode or was it being manually controlled? And also the growth of competitive formats following on slightly from competition at the top. This being based around the idea that generally a lot of these things, they do become an industry standard. So the kinds of risks that we are facing with regards to industry standards and competitive formats are quite severe, because the amount of money that's been pumped through the organization into creating this driverless car could be all wasted if, say, someone like Robocar gets there first to the line, then it becomes the industry standard. Other things you need to bring up are the importance of risks, or of embedding risk, embedding a culture of risk, not risk as in making people take unnecessary risks, but to install a culture of being aware of risks, being aware of the negative things that could happen as a result of this. And that will cause people to think before they do things, think before they propose certain things, think before they bring certain things to market. And this is also relevant Risk management is relevant at strategic level because we have to think about the risks in the long term. Would doing something now that risks our overall strategy, our overall aims in the long run, be worth doing even if it makes money in the short term? And also how you can control risks, the kinds of steps you can do to mitigate the impact of risk. And a lot of that is contained in the next slide here, which is on different theories that you can use. Now, the first one, obviously the big P3 risk method, is using the COSO risk cube, which I've given you a picture of here. Now, one thing I would say is if you are asked a question on risk, do not go into every single step of this risk model. Don't talk through strategic operations reporting, internal environment, objective settings, event identification, and so on and so on. You don't need to go through every single step because A, that will take a significant amount of time, and that will not be the kind of question you're being asked. You're not being tested out and out on the theory and your use of theory. It's how you can apply it. So you would almost talk about the COSO risk method from a more holistic point of view and how it can be used for the organization. Same for another couple of other risk strategies here. So of course you have the Tutor model, transferring the risk. I know they transfer some of the risk already by outsourcing some of their operations, accepting it. That's where you just consider the fact that you operate in an industry where cars can cause injuries to people, cars can run into difficulties, there are issues with technology, issues with software occasionally, and you just have to accept that. Reduce the risk, which is of course where you take steps to mitigate the impact of it on your organization. And finally, avoid is where you just don't do it at all. But of course, if you don't take a risk, you'll never succeed in a sense. If you don't push yourself to try and bring something new to market, you'll never bring something new to market. Risk mapping as well. This is where you look at your risks, you assign them a value based on their impact and their likelihood, and that then allows you to rank all the different risks of your organization by their severity to the business. That does help you to streamline your risks and to prioritize the ones that need to be taken care of. And that's something that the organization hadn't done in the pre-CIMA. And finally, the audit committee. Audit committees are responsible for overseeing risk at a more strategic level. And of course, they weren't mentioned in the pre-CIMA. Now, issue 9 relates to ethics and corporate social responsibility. Again, another thing that was mentioned throughout the pre-CIMA, or at least hinted at throughout the pre-CIMA. There was a whole corporate social responsibility report in the pre-CIMA. And also, the reason why it's in my top 10 is because it is probably the most commonly examined topic. It appears in most strategic variants because CIMA wants to be seen on testing people on ethics. It's one of their big topics, one of the things that was really mentioned frequently when there was the debate over the introduction of the new syllabus. And it's really something that you can expect to come up in some way, shape or form, be it as a topic in itself or as just something you need to consider when considering your answer to a question on another topic. And again, it's very, very commonly examined. In fact, in every single strategic case study since the introduction of the new syllabus in February 2015, every single exam has had 2 or 3 variants of the 5 containing an ethics question. So 40 to 60% of all of you watching this video will most likely have a question on ethics. And there was a lot of things related to ethics, obviously the health and safety with regards to crashes and accidents. That's a very actually ethical responsibility. We obviously don't want people to be getting involved in accidents, whilst at the same time we don't want to be being punished for it. We don't want to be accepting lots of legal responsibility, but at the same time we don't want to be seen as trying to skirt around legal responsibility, because that's not ethical. And of course, environmental issues featured regularly as well, particularly in the corporate social responsibility report. And that's one of the main reasons for a lot of the functions that AutoAuto installs in its products that are then installed into cars. It's all about the ability to allow people to drive more safely, more efficiently, which of course reduces the impact on the environment. I mean, the cars are still driving, but if you consider the millions and millions, hundreds of millions of cars on the road if just each car can save a small bit of greenhouse gases, of CO2, or carbon monoxide releases into the atmosphere over the course of the entire globe, over the course of those millions of cars on the road. That will be a huge difference, or make a huge difference. So some of the likely issues we've already mentioned here, something to do with emissions or to do with the welfare of the consumer, again relating to health and safety, and also ties in with what I was saying about not being wanted to be viewed as trying to skirt the issue, to the integrity of the organization. And some other very common issues that have arisen in the past, some of these not necessarily linked directly to material in the pre-scene, with the exception perhaps of pollution and governance, but ones that have come up frequently, things like confidentiality, where a senior manager has used information that they were privy to, supposed to keep it private, but they've released it to someone else in order to try and further their own position. The treatment of staff, be that at your organization or the treatment of staff at suppliers. And there have been instances in the past where suppliers have been, or the staff at suppliers have been mistreated, but because the company didn't do any supplier audits, it wasn't uncovered. And of course, when it was covered by the press, suddenly everyone was blaming that company. How could they have used this supplier that was mistreating their staff, etc.? And bribery is another big issue as well, particularly for ethics. You can foresee such an issue arising, perhaps where the organization is trying to secure a new contract with a particular car manufacturer, and they're bribing the CEO or the operating officer or whoever's in charge of sourcing suppliers to ensure that they get a good deal on the contract. Now, it's always wrong to bribe. There's no circumstance in CIMA's mind where bribery is justifiable, so keep that in mind. So key points that you must bring up when talking about ethics. CIMA always expect you to take the moral high ground. If you're on the fence about something and you don't know whether it is ethical or not, you go with the fact that it is not ethical. Unless you are sure that it is okay to do, if there's any shadow of a doubt, you have to go with the moral high ground. You have to be very critical of anything that can possibly be considered unethical. And what I would suggest you do is, if perhaps there has been an issue with safety or an issue with someone using information for incorrect purposes, is to make up a recommendation from both the short and the long term. Now, what the short term should be is, as I've said, it's the firefighting. It's the dealing with the specific issue. Okay, what are we going to do to stop? What are we going to do as a result of this health and safety issue? Maybe we have to change the safety procedure right there and then to stop it happening. But what was the long-term cause of it? Was it that people just weren't aware about how to use things properly? Was it because they hadn't been trained sufficiently? Maybe they weren't aware of the risks involved. But that's the long term. That's to stop it from happening again. It costs less in the long run to invest in ensuring something doesn't happen again, rather than dealing with each individual issue as it occurs. And of course, one of CIMA's sayings, something you should be thinking of, you should be mindful of whenever you are answering a question on ethics or corporate social responsibility, is that good ethics is simply the right thing to do. And so several theories you can use with regards to ethics and corporate social responsibility. Obviously, the CIMA ethical principles, such as integrity, confidentiality, professional behavior, objectivity. Objectivity, of course, very important for things like governance, and professional competence and due care. And another one here, we have the American Accounting Association resolution model, which asks you to consider sort of three questions whenever you're answering a question on ethics. So, do we owe a duty of care? If so, what is the end result from this lack of good ethics? what are the key values for the organization, what are the key ethical values, and what are the cultural norms as well. These are always things that you should be considering when answering a question on ethics. Now, you don't necessarily need to learn all these models, and again, just as with the risk model, you don't need to bring them all up one by one and go through every single stage. You just should be mindful of it, perhaps use it when concluding why something is unethical or ethical, etc. And again, keep repeating this phrase, simply the right thing to do. And for corporate social responsibility, the two big ones being the Global Reporting Initiative, exposing how you're doing it, how you're looking after the company, how you're keeping it sustainable for economical, social, environmental reasons. Obviously, as a public company with a lot of stakeholders and an impact on the environment itself, it's important that you do communicate to your stakeholders how you are dealing with things. And obviously the Carroll's CSR pyramid as well, considering each of the particular models or particular segments of said pyramid and why they're relevant to the organization, and other models like and bits that you have learnt at when you were doing your E3. So I hope you've enjoyed this sample video and more importantly found it useful. Before I go, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few of the products that we do here at Astranti Financial Training, specifically for our case study courses. We have a study text which details all the key theories in which you will be expected to use in your case study exam, as well as details of how to approach the pre-scene and the case study. We also have a series of course videos detailing how to answer case study questions. This is actually an area in which many students struggle. Most of the scripts that I've seen, the failing scripts that I've seen, has actually been due to poor case study technique rather than lack of knowledge. We also have a series of pre-scene analysis videos based on the current up-to-date pre-scene, detailing all the key bits of information and likely issues you may face in the exam. Next up is the industry analysis, a pack detailing information about the industry that the pre-scene company resides in, information about the key players within that industry, and more background information on the industry in general. We also have a range of mock exams created for each level and based on the current pre-scene, which is a great way to get some practice in before you sit the real thing. We also offer marking and feedback on those mock exams so you can see where you are going wrong and where you can improve. Finally, we have the master classes. These are 2 one-day classes taken by our expert tutors to give you all the hints and tips you need to really add to your chances of passing the exam. Also, if you take our full course, we offer a pass guarantee, which, provided you have met all the requirements of the pass guarantee, you will get a free resit on the next exam should you fail to pass. So once again, thank you for your time. If you're interested in any of these products, please visit the website www.astranti.com for more information. Thank you.